Hare Krishna, very dear devotees, welcome back once again to our ongoing lectures on the glories of our most beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nivishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we're continuing with our mini-series on Stimulation for Ecstatic Love, and this will be part 6. And of course, as we've discussed through this series, we hope to increase our enthusiasm for devotional service to the Lord. Sri Rupa Goswami writes in Padyavali, text 93, O Lord Krishna, I pray that the remnants of your foodstuff may become as palatable to me as a woman's lips are palatable for a materialist. I pray that the narration of your pastimes may become so sweet to my ears as the words of a young girl are sweet for a materialist. I pray that the sight of your transcendental form may become as pleasing to my eyes as the beauty of a young bride is pleasing to her husband. And I pray that I may always chant your holy names in the same way that a lover reads aloud a letter from his long-separated beloved. Hare Krishna. So, from this verse we can understand that essentially Krishna consciousness means falling out of love with Maya or illusion and falling into love with Krishna. For that we have to let Krishna, sweep us off our feet with his charming beauty. In this regard, again, Sri Rupa Goswami writes in Padyavali, a dark-complexioned thief has stolen my heart. Look, he has already stolen the sins of the surrendered devotees, the life breath of Putana, the bracelets and garments of the young gopis, and the eyes and hearts of the saintly devotees. So, once again, so many times, once again we are indebted to Srila Rupa Goswami. Not only us, but many devotees in the past have felt the same way, very indebted to him. One such devotee I was reading, his name is Govardhan Bhatta Goswami. Govardhan Bhatta Goswami. He was one of the prominent Goswamis in the line of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, one of our 6 Goswamis in Vrindavan. He lived during the time of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and he actually wrote a commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the introduction to his commentary, he writes, and I'll quote him, my greatest good fortune is that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and I are friends forever. That's so sweet. My greatest good fortune is that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and I are friends forever. So this Govardhan Bhatta Goswami, he wrote another book called Govardhan Bhatta Goswami Grantha Vali. Govardhan Bhatta Goswami Grantha Vali. And one part of his book is called Shri Rup Sanatan Stotra, in which I was seeing there's many shlokas glorifying our beloved Rupa Goswami. For example, here are 2 of the verses. Who can achieve the shelter of the lotus feet of Sri Radha without the association of Sri Rupa? By hearing his beautiful compositions and by looking at his incomparable pearl-like beauty, Sri Gaurasundar happily dances while glorifying and praising him with all the devotees. Today Sri Rupa is residing in Sri Vrindavan, being more humble than a blade of grass and more tolerant than a tree. He is holding a clay pot in one hand and a woolen blanket on his shoulder. he is singing the pastimes of Radha Kanta, while sometimes sitting in the shadow of a kalpavriksha tree. He is constantly chanting the names of Krishna, and every day he begs from the houses of brahmanas. Hare Krishna. We thank that devotee. We have to thank so many devotees. So, within that beautiful composition, we hear that Rupa Goswami used to wear a woolen blanket on his shoulder. Now sometimes when I'm doing the research, I see that sometimes they're called blankets and sometimes they're called shawls or even chadars. But more often than not, they're called blankets. But not only did Rupa Goswami and the other 5 Goswamis of Vrindavan wear these woolen shawls or blankets, but so did Krishna and his cowherd boyfriends. And such shawls or blankets are listed in our Shastras as one of the items that can awaken, or we're using the term in this series, stimulate our devotion for the Lord. So I thought blankets would be the subject matter for today's lecture. That was all the introduction. Blankets, let's discuss blankets as part 6 in our series of Stimulation for Ecstatic Love. Now in my research, I found that Krishna often uses a blanket and in various ways during his pastimes. In the online extended ISKCON Vaishnav songbook, we find in verse 3 of the song Jaya Madhava Murari. If you go online, you can find that. Jaya Madhava Murari. The following: Gwala Bhala Shanga Dhenu Charai Vana Vana Brahmata Pire Yadu Rai Kande Kamara Kari Radhe Sham Shama Sham. So beautiful. Translation is, Dear Krishna, you herd the cows in the company of cowherd boys. You, the monarch of the Yadu dynasty, thus wander from forest to forest, carrying a blanket. Here we go. Carrying a blanket draped over your shoulder. O Radhe Sham Sham Sham. Beautiful song. Other ways that Krishna uses a blanket are, for example, like a bedspread when he sleeps after his forest lunch party, it's described. It's like that, they say. His forest lunch party. Spreads out a blanket to take some rest along with his cowherd boyfriends. He uses a blanket to cover his body from rain. And I was reading that the fabric of such a blanket doesn't absorb water. Krishna has a waterproof blanket. I also read in one pastime, let me remember, that Krishna covers himself with a blanket when Mukara is Sri Radha's grandmother, tries to catch Radha and Krishna together. He hides under his blanket. Now, I was also reading sometimes Krishna ties a blanket and uses it as a turban. And the sweetest thing is that when he sees a small calf shivering in the cold, he covers it with his blanket to warm it up, along with a hug. Isn't that nice? When he sees a small calf shivering in the cold, he covers that calf with his blanket to warm it up, and he also gives the calf a hug. Hare Krishna. Now, it's also described that whenever Sri Radha, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani Ki, when Sri Radha looks at Krishna's dark blanket, hanging or lying somewhere, her eyes immediately become filled with deep love. And she experiences ecstatic symptoms. In fact, here in Braj they say, Sut che jhara byaj ho prayaro. If you love someone, then you love his or her things more than you love your own self. Very beautiful. Sut che jhara byaj ho prayaro. If you love someone, then you love his or her things more than you love your own self. Well, that's Sri Radha. it's described that Sri Radha herself also uses a blanket from time to time in her pastimes with Krishna. For example, once on a dark moon night, Sri Radha's gopi friends assembled in her sitting room at the Yavat. And there she was taking rest. And when she rose from her sleep, they helped her dress up to blend in with the darkness in order to go through the Vrindavan forest undetected to meet her beloved Krishna. She has to go out through the forest to meet Krishna. So they dressed her up appropriately. It was a dark moon night, so they dressed her in dark clothes, like a dark blue sari I was reading, and a dark blouse or choli. And then her servants adorned her braid with a black tassel and smeared dark musk on her body and decorated her with dark blue ornaments to match her dress. Like we call that Shringara here in Vrindavan. The Shringara means the jewels, all dark blue sapphires like that. And they also covered her with a shawl or a blanket. Now, interestingly enough, Sri Rupa Goswami writes in verse 4 of his Gandharva Sampartana Ashtaka as follows. It's related to this pastime. O goddess who strongly wishes to meet her lover, when can I arrange for your blissful nocturnal meeting with the son of the king of Braj in the grove by covering your body with a cloud blue shawl? By covering your body with a cloud blue shawl. Rupa Goswami is praying like that. And by removing the ankle bells from your feet. Wow. Now, we move on. The cowherd boys, Krishna's cowherd boyfriends, they also use blankets in their seva to Krishna, because everything in Vrindavan exists for the pleasure of Krishna. The blankets. So while these cowherd boys graze their calves in the pastures of Braj, Krishna and Balaram, they play with their friends in various ways. I was reading they sometimes throw stones at the fruit in the trees, and when the fruits fall, they either kick them around, like in playful sport, or they throw them around, like playing catch. And sometimes they imitate the fighting of bulls, cowherd boys. And during these pastimes, like imitating the fighting of bulls, the boys cover themselves with their blankets. And like bulls, they loudly roar and they charge each other. So little detail, but pure nectar. Love is in the detail. Now the mention of blankets in Krishna's pastimes comes up, how could I say, in a variety of ways. Little ways. For example, after Krishna chastised the Kaliya serpent by jumping into the Jamuna River and fighting with him, he came out soaking wet. And as we know from reading Krishna book, Krishna was shivering from cold. So it's described that Mother Yasoda dried him off and wrapped him up in soft blankets. But of course, even then, Krishna was still shivering. So he climbed up Dwadasa Ditya Tila to warm himself in the afternoon sun. And we see that every time we do Parikrama here in Vrindavan, we pass by Dwadasa Ditya Tila. That's where Sanatana Goswami Samadhi Mandir is, and that's where the Madan Mohan temple is. So it's a little high, so Krishna climbed there to get warm in the sun because the blankets weren't enough. But blankets. I also read that one morning, this is interesting, one morning both Mother Yasoda and Yogamaya went to wake Krishna as usual, but on that particular occasion he barely stirred in response to their calls, and instead, it's described, he pulled a blanket over his head and moaned to his mother and Mother Purnamasi, "I feel sick today." He pulled a blanket over his head and he moaned, "I feel sick today." So they let him sleep. Now, an interesting thing is that there's a forest in Vrindavan. We've many times described forest and sub-forest and sub-sub-sub-forest, etc. So there's a forest here in beloved Vrindavan, where I fortunately find myself again, called Kamaravan. One meaning of Kamara is blanket. And there's a famous blanket pastime that took place in Kamaravan, from which the forest got its name. This pastime is described by the famous poet Surdas. How many times have we quoted Surdas? Actually, I've been to his samadhi. Very simple but very beautiful samadhi at Chanda Sarovar here in Vrindavan. And his poetry is just loved by Brajabasis. So in one of his poems, we find the following pastime. And I'll summarize it a little bit rather than just read his poetry. Summarize. It all began on a winter day in Vrindavan. Actually, I'm here in Vrindavan now in the winter. It's very chilly. So it all began on a winter day in Vrindavan when Krishna and his cowherd boyfriends were herding their cows near sacred Govardhan Hill. Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai. So from there, Krishna sent a message to Sri Radha to secretly meet with him in nearby Kamaravan forest. Now this message was delivered to Sri Radha by one of Krishna's boyfriends, one of the cowherd boys. How's that? Well, most of Krishna's cowherd friends have little to do or nothing to do with the young girls of Vrindavan. But there was, or you could say there is, a special class of cowherd boys who actually facilitate Radha and Krishna's meetings. We discussed this several years ago. They're called Priyanarmasakas. Priyanarmasakas. Cowherd boys like Shubal and Ujval, who deliver messages back and forth between Radha and Krishna. Now, there's also gopi messengers, young girls who deliver messages. The principal gopis who deliver messages are 3 in number. Vrindadevi, Vrindarika, actually there's 4, Mela and Murali. They're the main message. But there's lots of gopi messengers. And all of them are described, I was reading, as fair-complexioned and always dressed in colorful garments. Always dressed in colorful garments. Not like nowadays in Kali Yuga. People wear grays and blacks and browns. Braj, dressed in colorful garments. We see that especially now in Rajasthan. The ladies dress in many colors. So it's written that all these gopi messengers, they're filled with great love for Radha and Krishna, and, listen to this, they all know the geography of Vrindavan very well. They all know the geography, because they have to take the messages, so they know all the pathways and the secrets here, and where to hide in the caves, and all glories to those gopi messengers. Now, then again, there are the famous parrots of Vrindavan, like Sukha and Sari. They're famous also for carrying messages back and forth between Radha and Krishna. And Vichakshana. Who's Vichakshana? That's Krishna's pet parrot. And he's described in the Goswami literature as a very experienced personality in delivering messages for his master Krishna. He's famous here in Braj for having said one time, the parrot, of the many services rendered to the Prince of Braj, delivering messages is the most exciting. He thinks like that. Of the many services rendered to the Prince of Braj, Krishna, delivering messages, it's the most exciting. There's many different rasas or mellows of love for Krishna, and each devotee is fully satisfied in that relationship with Krishna. So many, because variety is the spice of life. And finally, we know that Krishna sends messages throughout Vrindavan with his famous Venu, or flutes. So anyway, on this particular winter day, Krishna sent a message to Sri Radha to meet him at Kamaravan, this subforest. And on that day, the air was very chilly, winter. So Krishna and all the cowherd boys were carrying their thick blankets with them. So when the time came for Krishna to secretly meet Sri Radha at Kamaravan, he had to get away. So he told his friends that he wanted to wander and see the beauty of Vrindavan alone. And taking his blanket, he made his way to this beautiful Kamaravan. And when he arrived, it's described, he placed his folded blanket on a large rock. And sitting on it, he waited for Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani to come. And in this poem by Surdas, he describes Krishna's blanket as black in color. That was interesting. Krishna has a black blanket. He calls it Kari Kamara. Kari Kamara. Kari Kamara. That's the name of Krishna's blanket. Kari Kamara. But unfortunately for Krishna, even after many hours, Sri Radha had not showed up. So he became despondent. Because one thing about Krishna is that he's very unhappy when he's alone. Why? Because, very simply, without his friends and companions, he could not taste or experience rasa. Rasa means, one definition of rasa is the mellows of loving exchange. Krishna's essential nature is to enjoy. That's confirmed in the Taittiriya Upanishad 261, in which the constitution, you could say, of Krishna's body is described as follows. I found this. It said, Krishna's head is pleasure. His right side is joy. His left side is delight, and his identity is bliss. I'll recite that again. Krishna's head is pleasure. His right side is joy. His left side is delight, and his identity is bliss. And being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we are also, essentially our intrinsic nature is to enjoy with Krishna. When Krishna is pleased, we're naturally pleased. And as we said many times before, real enjoyment is experienced not in being alone, but in the company of others. Sometimes we may just go to our room, to take a break, but if we want to enjoy, we search out other persons. 1, 2, 3, whatever. So that very same Taittiriya Upanishad confirms Krishna does not like solitude. It's stated in that Upanishad, Kama yata bahu sham praja yeya. Kama yata bahu sham praja yeya. Quote, the Supreme Lord desired, let me become many, let me father many living entities. Didn't want to be alone. Just like a family man, or a couple in this world. They're married, and one time Prabhupada said, what is grihastha life without children? And it's a pleasure to raise nice Krishna-conscious children. So in the same way, the Lord expanded as many. For his personal enjoyment, he expands his Ladini Shakti, Vrindavaneshwari, Srimati Radharani, the divine couple. So anyway, back to the pastime. So Radha was late that day. She was late, but not of her own accord. Rather because of the watchful eye of her mother-in-law, Jatila. As a pastime, yes, Radharani is married to Abhimanyu, and Abhimanyu's mother is Jatila. And as we've discussed many times, Jatila is aware of Radha and Krishna's love for each other and is always on the lookout to make sure they do not meet. So that day, particular day when this rendezvous was supposed to take place at Kamaravan, Jatila was just keeping a keen eye on Sri Radha. and was not even letting her go for her scheduled worship at Suryakund, divine Suryakund. And as a result, the acharyas write that with every passing moment, Krishna's kama, his loving desire to be with Sri Radha, intensified. And they write that mood can still be felt in Kamaravan today. And of course, this is another reason for the name, Kamaravan. Kama means desire. So it's a forest where Krishna felt intense spiritual desire for Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani, the Queen of Vrindavan's association. So the acharyas say that Krishna was in this mood of anxious, vipralambam bhav. He was repeatedly rising from his seat off there and walking down the path and then returning to his seat again and walking down the path and returning to sit on the blanket. His eagerness to meet Sri Radha built up minute by minute until it's described, he was actually on the verge of fainting. So to prevent himself from actually falling down and losing consciousness, as well as to let Sri Radha know the seriousness of his condition is described, what did he do? He spoke to his flute. With so much nectar. Krishna spoke to his flute. He addressed his flute as follows: "O friend." Everything in Vrindavan's personal, remember. "Friend, you are my final resort. Please communicate to Sri Radha that I stand on the edge of a precipice from which only her touch can pull me back." So the flute, listen to this, the flute went into a state of samadhi. And without even making a sound, without playing a note, the flute communicated Krishna's message to Sri Radha. All glories to Krishna's flute. Now fortunately, when Sri Radha received the flute's message, she was already close enough to save Krishna before he fell to the ground. And it's interesting just how she did that. It's described that as soon as she got close enough to see Krishna, she stepped on a dry branch, making a loud, like cracking noise. And Krishna heard the noise, and at this looking around, he saw Radharani's golden effulgence, which is described alone prevented him from falling unconscious. Wow. Radharani's golden effulgence, that prevented him from falling unconscious. So leaving the spot where he was sitting on his blanket, he rushed forward to embrace her. And that afternoon they spent many hours together, walking, talking, and joking in this very auspicious Kamaravan forest. And sometime later, Sri Radha left to go back to Yavat. And Krishna, it's described he just continued walking around in a daze of love, it said, in a daze of love. And while he was walking around in this daze of love, a thought came to his mind. Where's my blanket? He couldn't remember he brought his blanket, was sitting on it. This daze of love. Where's my blanket? Did I bring it to Kamaravan? Or did I leave it with the cowherd boys? So the acharyas say that, still bewildered by the effect of Sri Radha's company, and even more so by her departure, he couldn't recall where was his blanket. So he addressed a group of gopis nearby who were, it's described they were busy tidying up the sacred forest. That's how it's described. I thought that was interesting. Tidying up the sacred forest. He said, and he also addressed them in a similar way as he addressed his flute earlier. "Dear friends, gopis, have you seen my winter blanket somewhere in this forest?" Now, though shy, these girls, these Braja Gopis, took the rare chance to talk with Krishna. One gopi said, "Oh, a strong gust of wind blew it into the Jamuna. I saw it float away," teasing him. Krishna was startled. Then another gopi said, "I don't think that was Krishna's blanket. On our way here, I saw some cows near the path chewing on something. I think it was Krishna's blanket." So then a third girl teased, "Krishna, don't worry. For the small price of a flute song and a dance, we will give you a new blanket, much better than the old one." But Krishna was in no mood for joking. So he left to continue looking for his blanket. Now, it gets better, like everything in Krishna consciousness, it just gets better. Suddenly, in the forest, he came upon who? Durvasa Muni, standing with long, matted locks, wearing only a loincloth. And what? Happily holding Krishna's blanket. So it's said that, how's it put? Though many sages roam the forests of Bharat in India, Durvasa Muni is easily recognized amongst all of them. How so? The Mahabharata, Adi Parva, 120, verses 4 to 5, describes them as follows. Durvasa Muni, Ugram Bharya Charatatra Brahmanam Sam Sita Vratam Nigudha Nischa Yam Dharme Yam Tam Durvasa Samvidu. Sounds pretty strong, pretty heavy, yes. Quote, "There was a Brahmana who executed extreme austerities and who always keeps his thoughts and decisions about dharma extremely secret. That sage was known as Durvasa." Durvasa Muni ki. So standing before Krishna was that very person, Durvasa Muni, holding Krishna's blanket. It's described as if he had just discovered a great treasure. And certainly it was. So then Durvasa Muni said to Krishna, "O son of Nanda, is this your blanket?" To which Krishna replied, "O Muni, it was mine until it came to you. My duty is to distribute wealth to the brahmanas daily, but I can never accept a gift from a brahmana other than his gift of transcendental knowledge." Wow. "Therefore, what you hold now belongs to you. You know the principles of Dharma, the knowledge that paves the way to liberation for conditioned souls. Please do with the blanket as you wish. My respectful obeisances unto you. All glories to you." Wow, Krishna's words to the Brahmana, Durvasa Muni. Now, pleased with Krishna's humility and kindness, Durvasa Muni accepted the Lord's blanket, Kamara, as what? Mahaprasad. The sage knew that by wearing that blanket, he would be freed from the cycle of birth and death. It's called tadiya, things that are used by the Lord or the Lord's pure devotees. They take on a spiritual quality. They're called tadiya, related to the Lord. All that tadiya is very potent. Actually, I was remembering that Uddhava, Sri Uddhava, teaches us about the importance of honoring Krishna's remnants in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 6, verse 46. There he says, and I quote Uddhava, Sri Uddhava, "Simply by decorating ourselves with the garlands, oils, cloths, and ornaments you, Krishna, have enjoyed, and by eating the remnants of your meals, we, your servants, will indeed conquer over your illusory energy. Hare Krishna. So that's but, one pastime amongst many about Krishna's blanket, or blankets, which if we hear about attentively, will help to awaken our dormant love for the Lord. They're actually unlimited things which we can meditate on about Krishna. And in that sense, there's no excuse for not falling in love with Him, even in this one lifetime. There's so much material, Krishna conscious material, that we can hear about, that will be a stimulus for ecstatic love. Like just hearing about Krishna's blanket today. So in this regard, we'll conclude today with a nice description of Krishna from Srila Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion, again, chapter 26, that you might want to meditate on so you can dream about the Lord in your sleep. Because Prabhupada has said, what we do during the day, the thoughts and things that we see during the day, sometimes we combine them even in funny ways to dream about them at night. He said, therefore dreams are illusion. But he said, when you dream about Krishna or the spiritual master, he said, that's a very nice dream. So here's some material that maybe when you close your eyes tonight, you can remember our beloved Krishna. So Nectar of Devotion states as follows. Generally, there are 4 kinds of garments on the body of Krishna: his shirt, turban, belt, and wearing garments. In Vrindavan, he used to put on reddish garments with a golden shirt on his body and an orange-colored turban on his head. The different kinds of belts combined with his enchanting smile used to always increase the transcendental bliss of his associates. This dress of Krishna is described as gorgeous. Gorgeous. As a baby elephant is sometimes dressed in colorful clothing, so Krishna's gorgeousness was manifest by decoration of colorful clothing on the different parts of his transcendental body. Sri Rupa Goswami Prabhupada ki. Nectar of Devotion ki. Sri Rupa Prabhupada ki. So Prabhus, thank you. Just a blanket of the Lord brings us so much pleasure. I think I can find a few more pastimes about Krishna's blanket. If I can, we'll continue our discussion on that tadiya, that blanket. If not, we'll move on to some other paraphernalia in our hopes of being stimulated to the point of one day experiencing ecstasy of Krishna consciousness. It's possible by Srila Prabhupada's mercy. So see you next Friday from Sri Vrindavan Dham. Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari, Srimati Radharani ki, Mayapur Dhama ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, back home, back to Godhead ki, Go Premanandi, Jai Jai Sisi Radhe, Shine, glories to Shri